And then this is verse 8. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And this is verse 9. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. If we could just lay this out, these 3 verses, it's a pretty long paragraph where God talks about what he has seen and what he has noticed. And what you noticed about this is that it's very repetitive. You know, I try to point out the different verses because I wanted to show you what God says about his people. That verse 7, he says, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering. So we get all these mentions of God's seeing us, hearing us, caring about our suffering. And then he says, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of this land into a good and spacious land. And then again we hear, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. Again, I've seen, I've heard, I see the suffering. I'm concerned about it. I want to rescue my people. God cares about us. God is very concerned. You know, and so we see that this isn't just a God who wants to know you and befriend you and get to know your name and, hey, how are you doing? What are your interests? Let's hang out sometime. This is a God who's powerful. We know that because he's a creator. But he's a God that wants to use that power to save us, to save his people from this incredible suffering, from this incredible injustice. God sees and hears it and wants to do something about it. I think that's still applicable today. Sometimes we wonder then, where is God? People ask. What is he doing? And I think God cares about our suffering. He really does. But what you see is God doesn't say, so I have come down to rescue my people. But I'm not going to do that just by, snapping my fingers. What does he say? Now, Moses, you go and you tell Pharaoh to let my people go. You go and you tell Pharaoh that that's not okay, what he's doing to my people. Right? And so God shows his concern, and he wants to save his people through us. And so, that's something that I think he still does today. He puts it on our hearts, that he reveals to us how much the suffering matters to him. He breaks our hearts. There are moments where I think those are godly moments. When you're watching the news or you see someone suffer and your heart breaks. Your heart is breaking as God's heart is breaking. That's who God is. He is a God who cares. And so God asked Moses, now go and talk to Pharaoh. And Moses has a very good question of God. And this is verse 11. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Who indeed? It's a good question. And I think one that we understand given the context. So Moses, he's a sinful person. He's committed this terrible crime. And that in the mere mention of God, he hides his face in shame and in fear. And then God says, okay, now go and rescue my people. You go and tell Pharaoh that it's time to let my people go. And he says, who am I? Why would you send me? I'm this incredibly imperfect person. Flawed, sinful, weak. He starts to give excuses about his speech later. He says, I can't speak so good. God, why would you use me? I'm not eloquent. No, I'm not a natural leader. I know other people that would be really qualified. They're really good, from what I can tell. They speak really well, but not me. Why would you use me? And so we see that God says, I will be with you. Again, relationship. I, the God of the heavens and the earth, want to be here with you. And then Moses says to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? And what shall I tell them? And God says, you don't ask that of God. No, he doesn't say that. He tells him the name of God. God said to Moses in verse 14, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, in all capitals, if you see that, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. If you will notice in your bulletins, the title of this sermon is, Hello, my name is Lord, in all capitals. Not in uppercase and then the rest lowercase. Uppercase L, lowercase O, and D. Because that's the way that the word Lord often appears in Scripture. I pointed it out right here, that it says, say to the Israelites, the Lord, in all capitals. Or oftentimes it'll be the Lord in a really big capital, and then you'll see O-R-D in capitals, but it'll be a little bit smaller. That sets apart this word, that you look at that, and if you looked at it for the first time, you might think to yourself, now that's interesting. Why is it written like that? Why is that word written so differently than everything else? Why is it all capitalized? Because, brothers and sisters, that is the holy name of God. And in some ways, this sermon is not properly titled. I said, hello, my name is Lord. But that is not God's name. That's what they put into Scripture. Because this name is so holy to the people of Israel. So holy, in fact, that they didn't even dare to pronounce it. Whenever they saw it, they would substitute a Hebrew word. And the Hebrew word would be Adonai, meaning Lord or Master. And so it became the tradition that as they would transcribe the Scripture, instead of writing the holy name of God, they started writing Lord instead. And so it became this tradition that any person, in the whole history of Israel, when they're reading the Scripture, they saw the Lord or somebody said Adonai, people knew what they meant. They weren't just saying Lord, they were saying the name of God. And that name is I am who I am, or I am that I am. And it corresponds to the Hebrew letters. The Hebrew letters correspond to the English letters, YHWH. In Hebrew, it's Yod-He Vav-He. It's something that in seminary you're told is called the tetragrammaton, which is a very fancy way of saying four-lettered name. Right? Tetragrammaton. You don't have to remember that, but it's YHWH. And I mentioned this before, that we don't even really know how to pronounce this name. Because in Hebrew, it's all consonants, no vowels. And so you figure things out just by context, right? And so there's no vowels at all. And so people kind of forgot how to pronounce this name because it wasn't spoken. There might be some people who know how to pronounce it, but they never tell you. And so people have guessed throughout the ages. Yahweh is one guess. And another guess, I mentioned this before, is Jehovah. Because that Y and that W are not really a Y and W. That's kind of, the way that we kind of transliterate it into English. But the Y is kind of in between a Y and a J. In fact, Jesus' name in Hebrew is Yeshua, or Joshua, actually. And so, we take the Y and it's a Yeshua that I can't pronounce. My Hebrew's not so good. But it's kind of in between. And so we, in English, have chosen to make that a J. And that W is not really a W. It's kind of in between a W and a V. And so in English, it later became a V. And people took the vowels from Adonai, the A, the O, and the A, and they put that on each syllable for YHWH. And so they came up with Yahweh, or the Y becomes a J, the W becomes a V, Jehovah. That is the holy name of God. Well, it's our guess. Again, we don't really know how to pronounce it. It's YHWH, Yod-He Vav-He, the tetragrammaton.